Hello, Smart Money True podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today I'm joined with Doug Lynam. How you doing today, Doug?
Doing great, Kirk. How are you?
Great. Well, glad to have you on the show. Excited to have Doug on. Doug, tell us a bit about your background for those of you who are not familiar with you.
Yeah, sure. So my resume looks like it was a roller coaster designed by Salvador Dali on a sugar high. But so I started off in an affluent family, grew up fairly well off. But my family really weaponized money, and I really rebelled against that world. First by running off with the Marine Corps. I went to officer candidate school and graduated top of my class, and then had a bit of a spiritual awakening and decided that unresolved anger issues and high explosives were probably a bad combination and maybe not the best career choice for me. So I took a hard pivot and I became a Benedictine monk. I joined a monastery for 20 years and tried to escape the world of materialism and money forever. Uh, and It was a great way to flabbergast my parents, actually. So really tried to find a way to kind of annoy them as well. But in a kind of ironic twist of fate, our community went bankrupt a few years after I arrived. And so I had to figure out this whole money thing. And I realized you really can't escape the world of money, even in a monastery. And over time, it was sort of my community service to the community guests would come to monastery with all kinds of spiritual problems. And they'd be like, "Would you pray for me?" I'm like, "Oh, sure, but a budget might work a little bit better." And so I ended up fielding kind of all kinds of every kind of crazy financial situation you could possibly imagine would come through the door. And then over time, I decided that monastic life was getting a little stale, and I eventually left to become a professional money manager and a partner at an asset management firm here in Santa Fe. And then really try to take the wisdom and tools I learned out into the world and maybe teach people how to have a healthier, more ethical relationship to money in the process. And that's kind of the quick backstory. And I've got two books out, and working on the next one comes out in about 4 weeks.
Nice. So tell me, I'm curious about your experience as a monk.
Mhm.
You spent what, 20 years as a monk? Like,
Correct.
how? Tell me about that. Like, what drew you to becoming a monk, and like, what was the lifestyle like?
Well, I mean, I've always had a deep kind of philosophical bent and a deep curiosity about the nature of reality. And so it was kind of maybe an existential crisis I was having in my early 20s and trying to figure out the meaning of life. Like, why are we here? What's it all about? And I figured I didn't really have a strong faith or anything going into the monastery. It was more of a figure if I was going to find God or the meaning of life, what better place to explore those questions than in a monastic community? And proficient with all world religions and spent some time in an ashram in India as well, and all those things. But yeah, I think it was really just trying to figure out what's this game of life all about. And monastic life is probably not what most people think. It's actually pretty busy. Ironically, I probably have more time for contemplation and meditation now than I did when I was a monk because there's just so much that's got to get done. I was in a teaching order. So during those 20 years, I was the head of a math department at a prestigious private school, teaching math, astronomy, and then economics and personal finance over time when I realized the kids needed some basic financial literacy skills that I didn't get growing up. So you got a full-time job you're working, and then you got all the full-time, monastic stuff You got your prayers, you got your cooking, you got your cleaning. And then, I was actually the youngest monk in the community by about 30 years. And so there's a lot of caregiving that's involved. So it almost becomes not quite hospice, but a little bit like that at times. It feels like that. You're kind of feel like you're a full-time nurse on some days. And then yeah, so it's kind of it was a wild adventure, and I'm glad for the experience.
Nice. Nice. Well, that's awesome. So what were some of your takeaways as to how that shaped your view on personal finance?
Well, I think what I realize is we all have these different, what I call money monsters, like these different unhealthy ways that we relate to money, and that, and what I have what I call the attachment theory of money, which I've developed in this new book. My new book is Taming Your Money Monster, and it's 9 paths to money mastery with the Enneagram. So the Enneagram is this robust personality system that we can get into if there's time. But essentially, I've layered on top of that what I call the attachment theory of money, which is for those who are familiar with the attachment theory of relationships, it's very similar to that. But what it says is essentially we can have two different unhealthy ways we can relate to our finances. We can be either anxiously attached to it, kind of like the Ebenezer Scrooge, driving our financial life with a bit of road rage all the time, or we can be money avoidant, meaning we unconsciously push money away or just hate dealing with it and don't really get to the details and the nuances or the financial literacy that's really necessary in order to have a strong financial life. And that can show up in different areas. So we can be money avoidant in one area, or we might be anxious in another. And what I call the four pillars of finance. So you've got earning, of course, saving, investing, and giving. And so most of us tend to be a little bit jumbled in our approach to money. We might be anxious earners, but we avoid saving by overspending on stuff. Or we might be anxious investors, but we struggle to give back to our community and really be of service to the world. So, really kind of, and what I realized in the monastery is that all of us were money avoidant. Like we all hated dealing with money, and I guess we took the vow of poverty maybe a little too seriously, and because we ended up in bankruptcy. But that you really need to be able to face these inner psychological wounds that create our unhealthy attachment style to money, so that you can really live the life that you want.
What is, in your experience as a monk, like what did you see as a meaningful life or even the meaning of life? Like what did you take away from that experience?
Well, that's a big question.
Not
What's
the
the meaning
not
of life?
the not yeah, not the meaning of life, but like what did you take away as your from your perspective?
Oh, well, I mean, that's a hard question. I would say, how do I summarize that? Basically, I mean, I would what you might call a panentheist these days, which means that you see God manifesting and moving through everyone and everything everywhere, kind of all at once, and that even the divine is beyond that too. So, I think different theologies and philosophies are helpful scaffolding to kind of get you to this place where you're living in more conscious unity with with reality, with everyone around you, and with nature and everything that's manifesting through this miraculous thing called life. And it's about learning how to navigate life with more love, more compassion, more skill and grace, so that you can, yeah, let love flow through you towards the people around you with as much as possible. I mean, that's the really the game of life, is learning how to love more. And whatever tools you find helpful for you to make that happen, then great. But there's just different ways of reaching that.
Okay, cool. Well, you mentioned before about the like the money monsters and the different things. I think it sounds like something that I've heard other place people call like money scripts, right? Like you
Mhm.
have your
Sure.
money script is basically you grew up in a certain way and this is the way it is, right? In your
Mhm.
life, because that's all you've ever experienced. Um, what is the contrast to that? Because I think a lot of people are anxious about money. You know, a lot of people are money avoidant. Like there's some what are the common themes? Because some of them are attached to generations or attached to, socioeconomic, like
Mhm.
demographics. Like how would you kind of like coalesce this into a way that people can understand and say, yeah, that sounds like the way I was raised.
Yeah, well, I'll just use my own example. So, my parents grew up, um, kind of in the 40s and 50s, and they grew up quite poor in poor immigrant families, and so they had this real money anxiety that really drove them for success, for status, for all the trappings of wealth, but they didn't really have, I would say, any real they just had these deeper wounds around it. And so it became a driving force, particularly for my dad, who was eventually an executive for an oil company. And he was a great man, and he had a very successful career, but he was so focused on success, and that he was what I would call an anxious earner, but maybe an avoidant saver, essentially. So he would throw his wealth at status symbols to sort of feel important, because he had this deep anxiety from his childhood about not feeling worthy, or not feeling, you know, um, he had a harsh alcoholic father, all these things that really made him feel like he needed this wealth, and the most importantly, the trappings of wealth, in order to feel good about himself. And eventually that kind of drove his financial life into a bit of a ditch in his retirement, because while he had a lot coming in his early years, he didn't maybe save and invest it as prudently as he could have, and and ended up, he wasn't poor at the end, but he wasn't wealthy either. Let's put it that way. And he had some real financial struggles at the end of his life because he didn't really master all four pillars of finance. And I think these money scripts really tie into our personality type. And maybe this is, there's generational issues, of course, but then we all have what the Enneagram tells you. So our personality has two components, right? We've got our nature or our DNA, and then there's the nurture, how you were raised. And I think the Enneagram is a really great tool for helping explain sort of the nurture component of your personality because it tells you what your deepest unconscious fear is that shapes how you drive through most of life. And it had a profound impact on how you relate to money as well. Uh, and so really what I'm trying to explore in this new book is really how there's these nine ego patterns. There's only so many ways you can design ego and have it function in the same way that there's only so many ways you can design a car. Like there's infinite varieties of cars out there, and you drive a unique year, make, and model that's distinctly yours. But cars kind of fall in general patterns like SUVs or family sedans. And the same thing is true in broad strokes with your personality. And once you understand what your personality type is in this Enneagram system, it can help you understand what that fear is that's driving you and maybe creating maybe some multi-car pileups and maybe driving your life into a ditch in certain ways in your financial life.
Yeah. So I'm curious if I think about my upbringing. So I've got Scottish heritage, and my wife is Dutch, so we're both thrifty. She's cheap, I'm thrifty, but um, there's different ethnicities, and this is from my upbringing. The upbringing now, people a little more homogenous, but my upbringing, it was a lot more, walled off. Like the Irish hung out together, the Italians hung out together. Like you had your own groups more so back
Yep.
then than you do now. But that I felt was a big part of the upbringing was, the tying things back to, well, you need to be thrifty and that sort of thing. So how does that play in to, raising proper money, aligned kids or even yourself? Like, how does that play in? Is that a bad thing? Like, because
No.
I'm maybe too cheap sometimes, and I try to balance it, but you can't be crazy and just say I don't have
Right.
any boundaries, and you can't say, well, I'm
Uh-huh.
not going to spend any money. There's a healthy
Uh-huh.
balance. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, so we can have a healthy attachment to money, which is a good thing to have. But if your thriftiness and your cheapness is coming at the expense of what might be considered compassion or um, just meeting the needs of the people around you to the healthiest level that you're able to, where if money can sometimes become a form of control, or you can weaponize it, or it becomes a way of if that cheapness is sort of like there's strings attached to your money when you're working with your kids, and you're using it to sort of like, for example, it could be money can easily become conditional. Where like, okay, I'll give you this if you do that, and if you live the life I want you to live, then you get the things. Or if you don't, if you're misbehaving, then suddenly up, no treats for you, none of the resources that you need. Say like, my dad withheld college tuition at times and things like that because I wasn't living the way he wanted me to live. So you can it's really a question of finding that balance between, you want to be frugal, and being frugal is a good thing ultimately, because you don't want to, if you're spending everything that you're making, then you're going to be broke no matter how much you make. So it's about finding that balance in your life where you're happy and healthy and secure in your finances, and the people are and you're able to really help to your best of your ability meet the needs of the people around you that you love, and ultimately using your money as a tool for love and service in the world.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about the weaponization of money. I don't know if it's a generational thing, but I definitely had that growing up.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like to the extreme you did, but it was definitely like, if you went along, then, like I played sports. So most of my upbringing was playing sports. And my dad's theory was he's like, well, you're either playing sports, and by playing sports, it means giving 100%, not just recreationally, but really giving it your all. You could do that or you could get a job, but you don't have to do
Yeah.
both. That was his thing. So, and
Well,
if you're doing sports, you're going to work at it and I'll make sure you can get what you need. Like he didn't throw money at me, but I had enough to survive, like
Yeah.
um and, go out for a pizza once in a while, but it wasn't a lot, but it was enough it was like a stipend, for playing
Yeah.
sports. And that was fine, but every once in a while if I went against him, he would withhold, which he didn't have to do too many times. Like I saw the writing on the wall and I liked my lifestyle, so I wasn't gonna push too hard. But it was definitely the weaponization, I think, is a good word to use, and that was a tool because
Yeah.
at some point, now he was a criminal defense attorney, so he saw a lot of bad stuff, and
Sure.
jaded him in many ways because he dealt with that element where I didn't have to. But when I think about it, it's definitely had an impact, and I don't do that with my kids because
Yeah.
I never agreed with that. But I understand because if your kids do whatever the hell they want, like how do you rein them in? If
Right.
they're misbehaving, what do you do? So
Hmm.
while I don't agree with it, I understand. And so, like, what would be a better way to manage that? Because you also can't just, the other side of this, you just give your kids stuff and then they don't respect
Sure.
money and they don't appreciate it. So, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question because it really depends on the circumstances and you and your kids and your relationship. I mean, this is getting really into the weeds, but essentially, I think it's important that your kids, you know, it's hard. I mean, it's important to set boundaries on your kids, 100%. And they need to know that there's negative consequences for misbehavior. And at the same time, you just don't want that your love to be attached to withholding affection or love because of the misbehavior. Like I love you, you've made a mistake, there's consequences, but the affection is still there, and you don't want to damage your kids' self-esteem or self-worth because they've made dumb choices, because we all make dumb choices, like that's a part of life, and they need to learn from it but not feel like there's this yeah that somehow you've misbehaved, so now my love is conditional on your behavior. My love is eternal for you, and I have to set these boundaries and tell you no, because that's one of the most important things that a parent can do is say, nope, this doesn't work for me. And it's almost better to have, I think it's, a good friend of mine, Richard Rohr, he's a kind of famous philosopher, kind of theologian dude, but so he has this kind of thing he calls the wisdom pattern. And it applies to children because the kind of the wisdom pattern through life is moving from order to disorder, then to reorder. And we kind of cycle through that constantly, whether it's in business, whether it's in our relationships in life. But it's really important, I think, to give kids a strong ordered container that they can even rebel against later in life. It's almost sometimes better to have more order, that they're going to go into disorder. They're gonna, do their own thing and make their mistakes, and then they can reorder into something maybe a little broader and a little better. But I think what I've seen is and that I was as you know, as a classroom teacher for 20 years, and some of the biggest problems I saw with kids were with parents. And I live in Santa Fe, and so kind of, you know, I'm not trying to play politics here. I'm just saying that there's some kind of the hippy dippy parenting attitude sometimes comes into a lot of what I saw in a lot of the families here, and some of those kids had some of the hardest struggles because they didn't have boundaries on them, and they didn't have that container, and they weren't told no. And it's almost and that I think sets kids up for a lot of pain later in life, more so than maybe if you're a little, and this is just my opinion, it's always probably a little better to be a little more restrictive, and they can rebel against that later than not giving them a container to hold their ego and hold their sense of place in the world, and give them a certain security to know that, hey, here's the boundaries of reality that I get to live inside of, and then you can grow out of that. But not having any boundaries, or too permissive boundaries, seems to be more damaging in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I listened to a podcast maybe about 10 years ago. It's not active anymore, but there were great episodes, and it was, you know, you with kids, there's a lot of stuff on generalization of kids and a
Hmm.
lot of stuff that probably pertains to girls, but not much on boys or men. Like it's just
Hmm.
boys and men are just supposed to understand things and you're just supposed to, get it through the ether. Like you're just supposed to just come into being and no one's going to teach you anything. I found that just ridiculous, but this podcast was brilliant and it's talking about how to raise good boys into good men. And
Oh,
one of the things they talked about is how different, and I have two boys. I don't have girls, so I'm, anything. My speculation is not done in experience, just from what I hear. But boys and girls, they grow up differently. Like
hmm.
girls, like academic schools are designed for girls, right?
Absolutely.
They're not designed for boys, right? If you
100%.
misbehave, you have to sit in and miss recess. No, if you misbehave, you get a double recess. Like you need
Right. You need to
you
get
need to
work
go
some energy
outside and
off.
run,
Uh-huh.
like
Get
and
out there and throw.
yeah, and one of the things you said was boundaries, which was actually one of the most interesting things I remember reading about or hearing was that boys need boundaries, and I don't know if this applies to girls, but especially boys, in that boys are risk takers. Like that's how they learn is through taking risk, and that there are boundaries. And if you give them boundaries, they will always test the boundaries because they are risk takers. They're always going to test them, but they know where they are, and the fact that there are boundaries gets rid of their anxiety and makes them comfortable. Even though they're pushing against them, it's what they need. And I found that to be a fascinating framework that I've never heard anywhere else, but it makes total sense. And I think it's true.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it, yeah, and it almost doesn't matter where you put the boundary. I mean, it matters where you put the boundaries. I'm not saying that that's irrelevant, but it's important that
yeah.
you set them. And as you said, they're gonna test them wherever you put them. But the worst thing you do is not put them up in the first place.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that with kids that are raised by hippies in the old days, you can call them hippies, where their
Yeah.
kids just run free and they're
Yeah.
free spirited, and I guess some of them are okay and some of them are a mess. They end up
Yeah.
doing acid and getting all messed up.
Uh-huh.
So yeah. So tell me a little bit about the Enneagram. I've heard of this. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but maybe the listeners are not. So tell me what is the Enneagram and how does that play into your personal finance philosophy.
Well, it's quite a complicated system, and we won't be able to hit all of it here in a podcast. But I'll kind of give you just a quick overview. And this really goes to early childhood development and how you individuated or differentiated from your caregivers and from your siblings as well. And so you have to kind of imagine, when you were born, there was a physical umbilical cord that was cut, but you immediately develop what I call you develop this psychological umbilical cord with your caregivers that allows them to do most of the driving for you in your early years. Um, and it's kind of an egoic codependence that they have and they have to have. But that psychological umbilical cord has to be cut, slowly over time so they can individuate and differentiate into a unique personality. But that cord has to be cut by negative emotions because positive emotions will just reinforce your connection to your caregivers. And I think a lot of those negative emotions come through the nose or the boundaries that we set. You see a kid throwing a temper tantrum when you tell them, no, you can't, kick the dog and you can't bite your sister and those sorts of things, or throw your food on the floor. And so your Enneagram type, what we know from the neurobiology, the recent research suggests that psychological umbilical cord can only be cut by one of what we call the big three negative emotions. And that's anger, sadness, or fear. And then there's only three ways to process the pain from that emotion. You can sort of externalize it, which is like having a food fight with the world, or you can internalize it, kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie, or you can do both. And that's why there's nine sort of archetypes of personality in the Enneagram, because there's these big three negative emotions. We tend to get hit with one of them more than the others in our childhood. And then we can process that in one of three ways: internally, externally, or both. And so that gives us these nine different kind of lenses through which we tend to view the world. I like to think of, I use car metaphors because I think it's helpful for people, but you think of it like you've got your DNA, and that's like, okay, if you're that might determine whether you're destined to have a good sound system and a lousy suspension. But your Enneagram type is kind of like the chassis, or the container for your ego vehicle. And then yeah, that kind of gives you a quick understanding of kind of how it develops. And then if you want, we could go through the nine types, or however deep you want to go into that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about the different types, just to kind of round out because I think I've probably taken it in the past, and I take all these tests, but I don't remember what I got.
Sure,
So
sure.
if you said it, I'd probably know which one I am. But yeah, it's like the INTB and all that stuff. Is that the Enneagram? Okay, yeah, I'm familiar,
No, well,
somewhat
no,
familiar.
that's Myers-Briggs,
Oh,
which
that's
is
my
somewhat similar. They have similar roots. A lot of it goes back to Jungian psychology. So Jung is kind of the precursor for all of these, but I think the Enneagram is a little bit more robust than Myers-Briggs these days. In part, Myers-Briggs is a little more static, where the Enneagram has this real growth model built into it. You aren't fixed. Like it tells you kind of where you start, but it also gives you this real path to development and to come into more emotional and spiritual wholeness over time. Um,
right.
but let me give you a quick armchair quiz, and if you want, I could send you a link. There's a really good Enneagram test that I like a lot. It's called the IEQ-9, and you could put it in your show notes if you want. I can send you that later. So if people want to find out their type, it's a great way to do that. But think back to your childhood and even now, like in your darkest emotional moments, which negative emotion you tend to feel more of? Is it more anger? Is it more fear? Or is it more sort of sadness and sadness and shame are kind of interchangeable in the system a little bit? Do any of those three
Yeah, mine's
feel
probably more anger.
more anger? Okay. All right.
There's
So
certain things I didn't have as a childhood, but that was
uh,
the sadness was not a big part of it. But yeah, probably
uh,
anger.
okay. So I think I have a guess at your type already, just come up from our conversation. But does that anger tend to be driven more out externally at the world around? Do you find yourself
Yeah,
so yeah,
yeah.
okay. Or do you drive it more
Actually,
internally
it's
towards,
both. It's both because I'm
yeah.
hard on myself. But um, yeah, I'm definitely hard on myself, and I get angry if I don't do what I feel like I should have done. But I also get angry at the world because I get frustrated. So yeah, it's probably more accurate. Maybe
Well,
both
it my
or
my my
external.
my quick armchair analysis, and this could be completely wrong, would be that you might be a type one and or type one or type eight. We can kind of tease these two out, but let's start with the low
Probably
hanging
eight.
fruit.
I'm just looking at it right now. The Challenger.
Oh yeah.
That seems to
Okay.
align with me pretty well.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so the type eight had is kind of driven by externalized anger. I mean, they we call them the challenger. I call them the Hummer of egos because they can easily run over any obstacle in front of them, and they like to push the boundaries of reality. Like they don't tolerate fools easily typically, but they like to take charge and be in control because their greatest fear for a type eight is being harmed or controlled by others. Um, so they tend to be very forthright with their opinions and often have this need to just maintain control as much as possible in their life.
I
Does that
actually, as I'm looking at number one, I think it's a little both.
okay?
I think you're correct in your assessment. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Because the way that the Enneagram Institute describes it describes they both describe me very, very well. So I don't know which one I am, but maybe I'm both. I don't know, but
Well,
yeah,
the reason I kind of landed on one initially, and is that sense of that ones can be very hard on themselves and on others, but they tend type ones have this internalized anger at themselves for not being perfect, or their greatest fear is being bad or defective. So they're always trying to improve themselves, but they're often trying to improve the people around them. So um they can come out as their anger often comes out as resentment or frustration when things around them aren't going right. Either they aren't doing things quite right, or the people around them aren't doing things quite right. So they're sort of hallmark. We call them improver. I call them the BMW of egos because they're sort of precision engineered, but they can require a fair bit of maintenance.
yeah. I mean, I would say, yeah. I mean, they both in different ways. They both sound pretty accurate. I mean, rational, idealistic, principled, purposeful, self-controlled, perfectionistic. I'm not as much of a perfectionist as other people in my household, and my sister, my father, but I definitely have enough of that where I'm aware of it. I don't have it as strongly as they did, but it's definitely a part of me. Like, but are you familiar with Colby?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a quick start.
Yep, me too.
And so I can adapt pretty easily. So if I know if I'm being like I'm a 5293, so
Hmm.
fact finder. So I can be a perfectionist, but I can also adapt and change. So I'm not like total perfectionist like some people in my life are really perfectionist driven. Like my business partner, he's perfectionist, which is great for his role because he might need him to be that. But
Yeah,
like there's I think what's interesting about all this stuff and learning about people is like how you interact. Like the Colby is something you can't change, right? I don't
sure.
know about Enneagram, but
Mhm.
if some of these things you can't change, so you just have to understand and adapt different things. So if I'm a quick start, I'm a two in follow through.
Hmm.
I'm a scheduling donkey. Like if I
Uh-huh.
that's like kryptonite for me. Like if somebody
Uh-huh.
tries to schedule something at the end of the day, my brain melts. I'm like, I
Yeah.
come talk to me tomorrow. I can't do this,
Uh-huh.
But if you get me in the morning when I got energy, I can do it. And so,
Yep.
I find it's finding ways. So is the Enneagram similar where you have to understand, then you just find ways to adapt to how you're wired?
Yes, and so yes, you're hardwired in a certain way, but there's also room for growth and there's room for improvement. And it actually has a kind of a spiritual dimension to it. And that's probably the thing that I'm most excited about that I've been working on these past few years is really trying to unlock the kind of the spiritual dimension of the Enneagram, which is sort of like the underlying code. Others may disagree with me on this, but I really think it's sort of the underlying operating system for most of our world religions. It's what gives us our sense of ethics. It gives us our the different virtues. Like we may, it's why we. I think the Enneagram is why we can agree there are virtues like honesty and courage and humility, even if we disagree in how to practice them. It's sort of like this underlying mechanics about how that spiritual adventure really works inside of us and can teach us how to grow into greater health. So if you're a type one and you're dealing with anger a lot, either at yourself or others, it can give you that pathway and teach you what are the so essentially the virtues that you need to practice, particular to your type, to help you overcome that and maybe drive life with a little bit more grace and skill and compassion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've definitely adapted um, with that over the years. Like when I was younger, it was an anger, but it was not a specific directed anger. It was just more like it's kind of like your body just needs to be angry at something and you don't know what it is. It's just like it's like the Hulk. You ever see that
Uh-huh.
the Avengers movie? Or it's like,
Totally.
Banner, now would be a good time to get angry. He's like, that's my secret. I'm always angry. It's like, in some ways I kind of felt that. Like it wasn't like a directed anger. It was just more like you just feel like you just need something and you don't know what it is.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so as I'm looking at some of these, I mean, I definitely identify with some of the attributes of some of the other ones, but not, and maybe it's just over time, because I don't feel angry anymore. I think it
Uh-huh.
was probably more, for me, it was more food related. I had food issues growing up, so it was like that actually impacted my behavior.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think it impacts more people than realize. But that to me impacted my behavior. So if I
Mhm.
removed certain foods, my behavior changed, and
Yeah.
it's been a lifelong journey for me. So it's changed a lot, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, do people out of the three that you asked, so anger,
Sadness and
sadness,
fear.
and fear. So is it possible to not have one of those three, or would you have
Well,
to
I
be a
mean,
monk? I mean,
I, I think we all have it. Maybe think of the Enneagram as a color wheel. Like think of it as this color wheel that we divide it up into nine kind of pie slices, and then kind of sort of your mixture of those three emotions kind of depends on where you land on that color wheel. So we all have all three of them to some extent, but one of them tends to be dominant, and then it's how you process that, whether you, as I said, or internalize it or externalize it or do both. So let me dive into your type a little bit more and see. Do you so the one way to tell the difference maybe between a one and an eight is eights have this we all have what I call your greatest vice. And so for type eights, it's lust, which isn't just about sex. It's a sort of this lust for intensity. They love a good fight. They just love getting in the mix and just and getting they're not afraid of a scrap. Let's put it that way, intellectually or emotionally. and sometimes physically. That isn't always the case. Um, but they have this need almost like for um, if someone pushes against them, they have to push back. It's almost like this what we call this drive. It's their we each have an ego addiction, what I call an ego addiction. And for eights, it's vengeance. Like they if something is trying to control them or get in their way, they just their knee-jerk reaction is to fight. Whereas for a one, it's going to be more pure anger. It's going to be a little. I mean, it can both look like they're both anger, of course, but type ones have instead of lust, they tend to have or vengeance, they tend to have anger and resentment. They get really just annoyed at themselves or at others when things aren't going the way they hope they would go. Um, do either one of those feel
Yeah,
more
see, this is
apropos to
this is
you?
where I feel it's a balance because if you're the way I think of it, so my dad was a criminal defense attorney, so I had to argue for everything in my existence,
Ah,
and so I learned the skill to defend myself and to argue for my supper, so to speak. You know, like not
huh?
literally, but like it was just a part of growing up. Like if I
Uh-huh.
wanted something, I had to argue for it. Like
Uh-huh.
I had to make my case and
Yep.
he didn't make growing up easy as no one did in that era. I mean, the Gen X,
Sure.
like we're latchkey kids, so you're either left by yourself or
Yep.
you had to struggle with parents who just, were tough because that era was tougher. And
Yep.
so the Gen X generation was a little different where I think of that actually that generation is marked with toughness
Mhm.
because if you look at all the movies, Stallone, Schwarzenegger was all about being tough. Like
Yeah.
all the movies, all the theme was like being tough. Like you're a
Yep.
tough guy, or like you're a karate man, or like you're fighting a war. Like it was all about that.
Yeah.
Um, there weren't as many like
Platoon and
sensitive movies where you were okay, you were sensitive. No, it was just like toughness ruled, and that's what won at the box office. And so that was an overriding theme. So I think about my identity like all the time. Like how do I identify myself? And one of the identities I think about is toughness. It's mental toughness. I played hockey and baseball in high school and in college and when I grew up in high school, it was part of the high school. It was like mental toughness.
yeah.
You had to be mentally tough. Somebody whacks you and it hurts, take it, get them later. Don't
Yep.
just react. Don't get mad. You can get mad, but control it. Like
Yep.
control your anger. Don't just get mad and go off the handle at the guy and get a penalty. Take it, get mad, internalize it, wait, and then get them later. Like it was more about being control of like being control of your anger, so to speak.
Mhm.
But I definitely had like the confrontational part was also a part of it because if somebody wronged you, like I'm not going to let that stand.
Sure.
Like I'm not going to take crap from anybody because that was also
Yeah.
part of my raising. Was so I was always somewhat confrontational. Like it just I couldn't just let something lay. I always had to, fight it. And I think that was part of the upbringing, which I've learned over time to manage that really well. I think part of it's age and part of it's just mindfulness,
Mhm.
um, of just
Do you,
being, but yeah.
do you think you have like a strong inner critic? Is there like this sort of drill sergeant in your head always telling you to be better or toughen up or
Not really. I look at it as I don't think of it as an inner critic. I just think of it as there's a primal drive to be
Mhm.
better. Um, as I've aged, that has kind of gone away somewhat because I've accomplished things I've want to accomplish, and I don't feel like I
Yeah.
need to accomplish the same goal over and over. I think of it
Yeah.
as like if you ran a marathon and you won, you don't need to
Yep.
keep running another 10 miles,
Right.
Like it
Take the win.
seems silly. Take the win,
Uh,
celebrate it, and do something else.
uh,
So that's how I've changed over time. Initially, it was just more, 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 and when I realized like I don't need more, so
yeah.
just quality of life is so things have evolved, I think, over time.
Yeah, and that's a sign of healthy spiritual maturity and growth that we're all supposed to. And this is where the Enneagram can kind of explains that maturation process that you hopefully we all can soften a little bit and overcome some of those issues that were driving us in our earlier years to be be a little bit more well, whatever our issues that we have to deal with. If for you is that anger that you can let it go, or that yeah, you've once you've accomplished a certain things that you've set out for life, you don't need to reprove yourself over and over again.
Yes, I mean, I love this framing of things. I think, I mean, I've heard of like hundreds of tests over the years, like do
Uh-huh.
this, do this, do this, and some people say, well, this is good, this is not good. I look at it, is it teaching you about something about yourself? Is it
Yeah,
giving you a framework that you can use to internalize and say, okay, this is how I see myself. Do I want to change or not?
yeah.
How can people use this, the Enneagram system within your book? Like, how can people use this to improve their life? Because for a lot of people, I know how hard this is because I work on it. Like, how can most people do it in a way that doesn't require you to become a monk or to be,
Right.
primarily focused on this and nothing else? Like, what can people do?
Well, I mean, they can buy my book, of course.
Of course, simple answer.
Um, and in it, I lay out. I think I've broken new ground on the Enneagram. So for those who are new to the system, or even those who are really experienced with it, I think you're going to find a lot of really big breakthroughs in how the system works. Because as we talked about at the beginning of the show, I kind of gave an explanation for why it works, and that's really new. I've been really digging into the neurobiology of it and the latest research, and a lot of up to this point, people have done a really good job, I think, of explaining how it works, but no one's really made a real crack in why it works. And then I've put it into this sort of really cool three-dimensional model. It's what I call the double cone enneagram. So typically the enneagram, people view it as a sort of like a circle or this flat two-dimensional shape, with all these kind of interconnecting lines. Whereas I've put it into this 3D model, so you can see your path to growth. What are the actual steps to what I call your shadow structure? This is a very Jungian concept, but like laying out, like, there's maybe 7 different steps to the shadow of each of the 9 types that allow you to grow from that, from birth, where you're sort of starting your journey in what I would call unconscious unity. Like in the womb, you're in this state of unity with everything you can experience, even though it's very limited. But you're unconscious of yourself. And so the Enneagram explains how you establish your independence in life in the way what I call the first half of life, the bottom half of this. Think of 2 traffic cones sort of stuck together at their bases, and so you're moving up this double cone, and your ego needs to grow in childhood. You need to develop an independent sense of self, and then your ego kind of gets so kind of, maybe sometimes we get stuck. We can kind of enter what some people call the dark night of the soul. We have tragedies and all kinds of things that hit us, and then we kind of need to break open some of these what I call ego addictions, or the ways that we coped with the biggest stressors in our childhood environment, to then moving then from a conscious separation into conscious unity, which is, I think, where our spiritual traditions are trying to take us. And then there's a clear path for that for each of the 9 types. And so what's really helpful, and then of course this all relates to money, which we were talking about, but the helpful thing, I think, what's really exciting about this book is it really gives you it lays that self-awareness out in a really clear, linear, for those of us who kind of want to get to the chase, like, give me the punchline. Like, all right, here you got it. I can put it in one picture for you, and it's all there, and you don't have to like be running around. And so once you know what your issues are, you have to work on, and what the specific steps and specific techniques are that you likely to find most helpful, you can kind of supercharge your psychological and spiritual growth more effectively.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think one thing you mentioned there, which I want to kind of point out for listeners, I think is really important, is most people are looking for the shortcut.
Mm.
They want the simple answer. You want to take a pill for? Can I take a pill for that?
Uh-huh.
Like, and it's so dangerous to think
Yeah.
in that way. You have to put in the mental work. I know people
Yeah.
don't want to, but it is worth it. And Doug, I know we're kind of running short in time here, so we got to wrap it up. But I really appreciate you coming to the show, Doug. Any final thoughts you can give us, and then where can people find more about you and your book?
Yeah. So just final thoughts is if you're curious to learn more, check out the book again is Taming Your Money Monster: 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. It releases July 8th, and pre-orders are available from booksellers everywhere. And if you want more information, you can check out my website, which is douglynam.com. That's DOUGLYN as in Nicholas, AM as in Michael.com. And there's all kinds of great resources there for folks.
Awesome. Doug, well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Maybe we'll have you back in the future because this is the kind of conversation I like to have. So, once again, appreciate your time, and yeah, we'll put a link to the to your website and the book on the show notes. So, thanks again for joining us.
All right, Kirk, thanks so much. Appreciate it a lot.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room.
All right, that was a great interview with Douglas. Really appreciate him coming on the show. And now we're into the panel portion of the show where we have our very own Barb Freeberg. Hey, Barb.
Hi, good to see everybody today.
Glad to have you on the show. And we also have our very own Doug Hagren. Hey, Doug.
Well, I'm just gonna correct you here, Kirk. He's Doug. I'm Douglas. So
Okay, all
you're
right.
living in the world of Dougs now. It's very important to get this right. So, but it was a good one. I enjoyed listening to him.
Good, good. Well, I'm going to get confused, so I'm just going to call everybody Doug. Uh, so Barb, what were some of your takeaways from the interview?
Wow, don't join a monastery that's going bankrupt.
Well, they do
That
drive
guy-
poverty. It's all about poverty. So maybe he's in the right one.
Yeah, I mean, that guy had a story, right? Talk about going the opposite way of your parents. I had a little conflict with my parents when I was growing up, but that is, you have to just be mindful of the decisions you're making, and you have to educate yourself about your financial decisions and what your predispositions were. I thought it was so fascinating when he talked about his parents who, built up a lot of wealth, but then had the idea of, I've got to show people I'm wealthy, high status, and then continued living that life when he couldn't afford it. I thought there was a big lesson in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doug, what about you? What are some of your takeaways?
Well, there's quite a few thoughts that not. First of all, it's such an interesting first world problem scenario. I mean, it's like I look at these. This reminds me, and I don't mean to get too political, but it reminds me of all of these protests on college campuses from all, especially these Ivy Leagues. it's like he comes from this world of, of wealth, which affords you the ability to say, whatever, I'm just going to go live this great life of, again, of the world and spirit. And well, then reality hits, and it's great when it's getting funded for you, but when you have to fund it yourself, then it's interesting how that changes perspective on a lot of things. And that comes at different stages in a lot of people's lives. And it actually raised something for me that I think about in the college planning world that I'm in, which is, a lot of times, again, going back to planning and for college and paying for college, there's a lot of kids that have this, I want to do this and I want to go to school and I want to be this. And then one of the first questions I ask is, well, tell me about the background of that you grew up in, right? Because the reality is this is what that you are used to as in your world. You're used to this level of environment, this affluency or lack thereof. And it's an important question to ask because, again, this idea that I'm going to go and become this and live this life, and then the reality of is, well, tell me, this is the world you're used to. Are you going to be okay with that change? Because there is something about that is inherently part of you. And that has so much of an influence on so many different things that we do and the ways that we live. It comes down very much into, in how we make decisions is going to be, the influence that or the experiences we've gone through. I mean, look at the individuals that went through the Great Depression and how that influenced decisions in their future. And it's the opposite. If you came from lots, it's going to influence decisions you make until you get to a point in which you either on your own through the things you read or the people that you learn from decide to make that change, or it's forced into you. And the truth is, look at all the teenagers that any of you have ever raised. It's much easier to get them to change when they feel it than it is to change when you've told them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about some people call money scripts. It's how you view money, it's how you were raised, your experiences, the aggregation of all your life put together and how you view money. I was raised to be thrifty, and that is good and bad. It's good because you're careful about money and you're careful about how you spend it and you're thoughtful. But on the other hand, it's also restrictive because it restricts you from looking at the opportunities that you can do with it. So all money scripts have two sides to them. Some are worse than others. But I think the one interesting thing is with the money scripts is, a lot of people don't have control over it. I mean, you mentioned, Doug, people who go to wealthy schools, they tend to go find themselves, if you will. I think it's an interesting aspect because we work with a lot of wealthy individuals, and when the kids grow up not wanting for anything, it actually can be a detriment because they go through life and in some ways they have to find themselves. I actually went to school with a lot of these kids, and their names you'd probably know. One of them was on the HBO documentary, Born to Be Rich. And so, I know some of these people. They never have to work, ever. Their grandkids never have to work. They're so obnoxiously wealthy. But at the same time, they don't have meaning in their life. And they're searching for it because most people have to work for a living because otherwise you wouldn't put food on the table or have anywhere to live. These people don't need to worry about those things. So a lot of them need to find meaning. And they struggle because, we as human beings get purpose from work. We get a lot of things from work. We get personal gratification. We get personal growth, social interaction. There's like 50 million things you can get from work. But if you don't have that, what do? You have to figure it out. And there's not a lot of direction for people like that. There's not a lot of, like there's hundreds of millions of people that work for a living. You know what that looks like. You've got plenty of roadmaps, but the wealthy, there's not as many roadmaps. So unless the family does a great job at instituting great habits into their life, it gets really difficult for these people to adjust. So I've seen this a lot in work and in school, because the school I went to know a lot of these people. Like it's a common problem, and I think it's in some ways it's harder for wealthy people to raise good kids because they grow up in a different lifestyle where they don't. And actually now it's a cultural thing. People are like, yeah, I'm just going to get a like $1,000 iPhone. Like, yeah, but you make like $5 an hour. Whatever, I'll figure it out. Like growing up, it was like, I just don't have money. It's not like I'll figure it out. It's like I don't have enough money to buy it, so I won't buy it. Now it's like, but put it on layaway. It'll be fine. So what if they'll take my house? Um, anyway, so Barb, Doug talked a lot about his obviously his life and his transformation. Also, obviously, talked a lot about some of the things that you know I'm trying to think the Enneagram and things like that. What do you think? I mean, what do you think is how should people be thinking about this? Are there good money scripts, bad money scripts? Because if somebody has one, how do you change? What do you change to? What's a better one? Like, what are your thoughts on this? How should people be thinking about what the goal of their change should be?
As someone who has been through therapy, married to a psychologist, I will say that knowing yourself and making decisions for yourself, apart from the messages that you got from your family, first of all, it's not easy. It is really, really hard, but it is super important if your family had bad money habits. So, for example, my parents were, raised in the Depression, kind of like you've talked about this a lot, Kirk, where I was raised where you have to be mindful of how you spend your money. You have to use, before recycling, whatever, you have to use what you have judiciously. If you can't afford something, you don't buy it. And so I was blessed with that. I carried that through, and it has been very helpful for me. I get where a lot of people today are born to parents who use debt a lot and then found themselves in really big financial trouble. So they don't have the models. And what that means is they need to educate themselves, or they need to get a money coach or a therapist or somebody, or take a course, somebody that's going to help them understand the tool of money usage. Because the basic tool is you earn money today during your working life in order to have enough income that will last your entire life, which means today you have to be saving part of your money every month, investing it so that when you get to the time when you're not working anymore, that money is there to supplement whatever Social Security might or might not be there. So, step one, be aware. Step two, educate yourself. And if you're making bad financial choices now, make a commitment to right those, to correct them. Live within your means and save for your future.
Nice. Doug, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, you mentioned something. I actually went to a school of several people like you did, and I could throw some names out as well. And I thought that was interesting when you brought up that special because you mentioned again a purpose, right? To some people, whether or not this is healthy or not, material items are a purpose, right? And it's like, hey, look at the flash, look what I've got. It gives them something to drive for. Again, many would debate the healthiness of material aspects as a goal, maybe to some limited degree, maybe just kind of a reward, right? But as your entire being. But when you get to the level like you're referring to, Kirk, with some of those individuals, that and that's something that the majority of the public can't even relate to, is that material means nothing at that point. It's everything and nothing at the same time, right? Do they have significant material things? Of course. Yachts, cars, planes, you name it. Anything they want, money can buy, including power and influence. But the point is that at that point, though, unlike most of us, the masses, even the affluent masses listening, there's a limit to that degree, right? It's like, okay, I can do a lot of great things, and being able to now get that Ferrari, that Lamborghini, to me, that is amazing. I can do that. To them, I mean, they earned that interest 4 months ago, 5 months ago, a year ago. It's like anything they want comes so easy. There's no purpose in the material. It actually, the material stuff becomes, I don't even know the word for it. It's just, it's almost painful, almost boring, almost numbing because it's anything can just be had so easily. And it's interesting, it reminded me a little bit of a conversation or years ago, or an interview years ago, where John McEnroe was asked how, if his kids were going to inherit any of his talent and ability and skill. And of course, the answer to that is sure, but they asked if he thought they'd be successful. And he goes, no. And they go, why? He goes, because my kids suffer from affluenza, right? They don't have the same fight in them because of what I've given to them that I had to go through to get to where I am right now. And so that can lead to, unfortunately, a lot of unfulfilled opportunity and unfulfilled potential because the two pieces that go hand in hand come back to like Einstein, or not Einstein, but Edison, right? 91% inspiration, 99% perspiration. They've got that 1% talent. They've got that genetic talent, they've got that intellectual talent, hereditary talent, physical talent. We see this all the time in sports, the five-star athlete that's go, what happened to them? Well, guess what? Just they had that talent. But do they have the drive, the ability to overcome, the grind, as they call it, that 99% that it takes to actually take that inspiration or that talent and create the outcome? And that's the same thing financially, right? The reality is that for most people, it's not going to come easy. It's not going to click your fingers. It's not already there. If you have too little of it, it can be hopeless, right? And you're going to have to really grind to get there. And if you have too much of it, it's too easy and but there's no purpose. And it's the middle ground. If it's just easy enough, then it's one of those things where it's almost the danger. It's comfort, right? And comfort creates another problem because not only is it I don't have the fire, once you have the comfort, I've talked to people about this for years, is if you have just enough that now not only do you lose the maybe the ambition to grow to more, but you begin to creep in the fear of losing it. And that can almost be paralyzing. And we start to see situations too where emotions come into that where people, and this is a big conversation for those that inherit money, that they fear spending it. Not be, one, because they might be running out of it, but two, sometimes it's actually that emotional tie to where it came from and a guilt. And now, and whether or not that, and even with the wealthy, did I earn it? Did I really, I have this, but what did I do for it? And you saw that even in that special. It's like, it's in my name. Okay, great. I'm a whatever. I'm not going to throw those names out there, but what did I do for it? But that's my identity, but I haven't created anything myself. So there's so much that goes with that. And, you mentioned, I'll pass it back, but you mentioned the Enneagram, like the reformer, the helper, the achiever, the individualist, investigator, the loyalist, the enthusiast, the challenger, the peacemaker. Every one of those, and I do believe there's an impact there, has such, wherever you line on that, there are going to be, very common financial behaviors. There's going to be strengths, but there's going to be challenges unique to that you're going to have to overcome. But what's the summary? It all has an influence on the decisions that you'll make going forward.
Yeah, I mean, made some great points, Doug. I mean, identity, purpose. I actually I thought it was a great interview. I loved Doug was nice enough to send me a book, so I'm in the process of reading it, and I started to read what was perceived as mine. I haven't read all of them, so I'm guessing it's the way it is. But I'm fascinated by this stuff. I always love the um how people perceive things in general. Like we all have these different perspectives on life, and they're all very interesting. and they're not right or like some like the way he's looked at it, they're not right or wrong. They're just different, and you have to figure out how your different can be improved, right? Like I like the Colby score with Kathy Colby. She wrote a book called The Cognitive Connection. Love it. Um, those of you know what I'm talking about. Like it changed my life. Like I found out like what my score was, and I started to reflect on it, and I was like, holy crap, I've been doing things all wrong. And now I've got tons more energy. I'm doing things, the way that I should be and not against the grain. Because before I was going against the grain, and now I'm just like, can't do that. That's going to be. But I know the things I do that suck the energy out of me, and I minimize them, or I wait until I have high energy to do them. Like scheduling for me is my kryptonite. My wife comes in at like 7 o'clock at night, and she's like, "Oh, honey, we need to change the schedule." I'm like, "Nope, nope, nope, nope. Tomorrow. Talk to me tomorrow." like I know, like I'm tired, and she just gave me something that's going to melt my brain. And I'm like, "Nope, no, you know the deal." And then we'll talk about it in the morning. It'll be fine. But like, that's kryptonite for me. I know it. So unless I have a lot of energy or unless I have nothing to do, which is rare, I can't talk about that stuff. It's hard. It's hard for me. But I can jump in the deep end and learn how to swim in the deep end. Like I can go on a trip to Europe without any planning and be perfectly fine, whereas other people would freak out. So I'm wired in ways that now that I understand myself, I just do more of that and less of the other thing. And so I think as with investing, as with money, as with life, the more you know about yourself, the more you understand how you're wired and maybe how you would like to be. Because as I've been reading about Doug's book, there's a spectrum of like, whatever you are, there's a spectrum of bad to good. And the idea is you're trying to elevate where you are in the spectrum. Um, I kind of look at life that way. Like wherever you are, like how can you improve yourself and people around you, people you care about, and your overall quality of life. And being angry at your parents because they did X, Y, and Z doesn't make my life better. It doesn't mean I'm wrong or they're wrong. It just means it's not improving my life. So why am I sitting here spinning my wheels, letting other people in control of me? Right? I think there was a quote I heard a while ago and I thought it was brilliant. And it was, whoever you're pointing the finger at is who has power over you. So if you're pointing the finger at the government or your neighbor or your spouse or your kids, they're the ones that have power over you. They're the ones that are making your life miserable. Whereas if you point the finger at yourself, you have the power. I'm at fault. What can I do to improve this? It's a simple thing, but that simple thing, I've talked to people, they've changed their life over just that little switch of, oh my God, I hate that guy. He always makes my life miserable. Okay, he's got power over you, as opposed to, okay, I don't feel so good. What can I do to improve myself? What can I do to improve the situation? What can I do to make things better? You make it your responsibility instead of theirs. They're not going to do it. Make it yours. You'll feel better. You got somebody who you're angry at? Okay, fix it. Like your anger is not making your life better. If anything, you're going to get a heart attack or anxiety. Just I know it's hard. I have anger too. Believe me, I've got a lot of it. My favorite quote is in the Avengers when they got that big monster coming at them and Banner shows up on the motorcycle and he's like I think it was Captain America's like, Banner, now would be a time to get angry. He's like, that's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry. And he turns into the Hulk. It's like my favorite scene ever. And I feel like sometimes that's me. I'm like, I'm always angry. It's just, you have to be able to control it, right? You have to be able to be in control of yourself and your emotions and don't let them control you, because that's how you have unfortunate things happen in your life, is because you can't control your situation. But when you can, bad things still happen, but to everybody, but at least your life is improved because you're not letting them control you. So I love these kind of conversations with people like Doug, because it opens up new angles of perception and perspective that maybe I wasn't looking at before and thinking about. I'm like, oh, now this thing that I didn't understand, now this makes sense to me. Okay. And I'm not saying what Doug's saying is correct. I'm just saying it's a framework that you can look at and say, all right, does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Is this making my life better if I change it? Okay, well, I'll try it, right? So just different frameworks, trying them out is what I've seen successful investing wise too, right? Am I a value investor? Am I a growth investor? Am I a trader? Am I long term? Try them all out. Figure out which one works best, right? We talk about your own investor psychology in the show a lot. So I think it's important to understand that. It's important to understand how you think about money. So Barb, as we kind of wrap it up, like final thoughts on your perspective on all this and where can people find more about you?
Final thoughts as a parent of an adult child who is fortunately very smart about money and has a good balance between spending, saving, and working. My advice is regardless of what your financial situation is, do not give your kids everything. Say no to your kids. Make them work for things. They won't like it, but setting limits and making them do things on their own are the steps to having independent adult children. So, I'm Barbara Friedberg. You can find me on YouTube and on my website, Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance. See you later.
Thanks for coming on, Barb. Doug, final thoughts from you.
Well, Barb, I like the way you put that. I think it comes back to the affluenza. It comes back to people, having purpose, finding their own path, being able to truly understand what goes in behind opportunity and behind success. And as you both know, I'm in the world of college planning as part of my more comprehensive financial planning for families. And if you're listening, you've worked hard to build what you have. Don't sabotage it by giving your kids everything. Don't sabotage not only yourself financially, but don't sabotage what they have financially, okay? And their opportunities by giving it to them. That's the challenge that creates and allows them to learn and build to what they're going to become, especially when it comes to college. And paying for school, that's changed, by the way. If anybody hasn't seen, the big, beautiful bill just had significant impact on college funding. If you're not aware of it, it is an important time to look into it. And therefore, paying for school shouldn't come at the expense of your own retirement, your freedom, your financial values, or their financial values. Because if you overpay or you just give them what you want, what they want, you don't just lose dollars. You're going to lose teachable moments. You're going to lose leverage, and you're going to lose long-term control. At my company, Mergent College Advisors, that's Mergent, we help affluent families pay the right price for college, not the default one, while protecting lifestyle, legacy, liquidity, and that opportunity. So if you're ready to stop guessing, if you're ready to start optimizing, start with our Easy College Report. It's the first step to a smarter, safer, more strategic college plan. Learn about the changes, the big, beautiful bill that may or may not be as beautiful to you depending on your circumstances, but give your children the best opportunity they can. And that means making prudent decisions right now without a blank check to the system.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, Doug. Really appreciate it.
That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, wealth manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.